Hireath is almost always taken as something that's an affliction. It drags you back into the past. You're looking mournfully back at what could have been but never was, or maybe should have been and almost was. And it's a way of emptying out the present moment and also preventing the gathering of energy for a creative future. That's kind of how the Welsh see it. It's retrograde, it's nostalgic, it's sentimental. And often that's the way it's been portrayed in Welsh literature and movies like How Green Was My Valley. I think when you're faced with the presence of absence or the long field, Hireath, one of the meanings, the potential meanings of Hireath, literally, linguistically, is the long field, which stretches between you and that which you desire. When you have a long field in your life, you have to fill it creatively. It becomes the uncomfortable, but the creative place where your imagination is engaged and inspired and turned on. And I see Hireath as not an end in itself, kind of like sentimental wallowing in nostalgia, but this spark, this engine that drives a creative impulse to imagine. And perhaps, Amy, you could show that interlace image, because I have this one. We're not supposed to read, but Jane and I talked about this, and I'm going to read just a couple of very, very short, like 1-minute paragraphs. So look at the Celtic interlace, and this idea of creative Hireath, I think is best summed up in a nutshell by King Arthur, the once and future king. So I'm now reading from a little bit of the book. The legend of the shadowy proto-Welsh chieftain, better known as King Arthur, is a case of Hireath igniting the creative imagination of an entire nation. More than that, it's one of the foundational stories of European civilization. For Arthur to seize the hearts of a continent, he couldn't belong exclusively to the past. If Hireath conjured only unrequited longing, it would breed only despair. Arthur needs to belong to the future too. That's the innovation. He inhabits the whole range of Hireath in his incarnation as the once and future king. The great hero of the past will come again in one of these tomorrows at our hour of greatest need, just not right now. Hireath may be born in the presence of absence, but flickering within that absence is hope, and that's the key. Hope is what gives Hireath its tantalizing creativity, its addictive allure. So I see Arthur as this kind of search for tomorrow that turns back on itself and becomes yesterday, and yesterday becomes tomorrow. And I look at interlace as kind of a diagram of Hireath, a diagram of that kind of creative longing. So there's a long answer to a very simple question.
I'm glad you read that passage, because also, you know, I think tonally the book is very American in it's a very informal tone throughout the book. You often turn to the audience and, you know, instruct them on how to pronounce Welsh words, which
somebody has to do that.
It confounded me utterly, but anyway, but it's that informality which also I think aids and abets the idea of breaking from the traditional definition of Hireath, because, you know, you're pulling away from, you know, the way other people have normally talked about it, with a kind of, you know, more formal, almost a reverence. And not that you don't have reverence, but it's a kind of also there's a sort of delight and lightness and energy to it that is very different. So the tone
true.
sort of matches the tone matches the kind of you know, idea behind the book, the central idea behind the book, which is really great.
I think that that's really true. And I kind of wrote the book with an American accent in mind. I wanted it to be clear that I'm American, and my kind of innate, endlessly annoying optimism just overly optimistic. But that is so American to me. My Welsh friends say that's my most American trait. And so I'm bringing an American accent, an American lens to Hireath. And so it's going to be different. I think you're right.
Yeah. And it makes sense too. I mean, you mentioned you spend a lot of time, and it's clearly something that's very close to your heart amongst all the various landscapes you talk about is the megaliths, the stone structures throughout the country. And I'm just wondering if you want to elaborate on that, the sort of idea of both landscape and myth making, and the eternal mysteries of the megaliths, because we'll never know what they're all about, and so we can only dream into them or imagine. They're part of imagination and story, I think.
Oh, I love that we can dream into them. That's a great line. And another great line is from the Welsh writer Jim Perrin. Actually, he's English, but he's lived in Wales so long. Who wrote a wonderful book called The Hills of Wales. And he talks about needing to still ourselves into not knowing when it comes to the megaliths, that we can't know why they were put there. That Hireath, that long field, disappears over the farthest horizon of history and falls off into prehistory. And we can't go there for answers. So this book was hard to write. It all looks so, here it is. It's just, here it is. And it's so logical. It's just in numbered pages and chapters that kind of make sense, and it adds up. And yet, I used to run screaming through the house, tearing my hair, trying to figure this out. What did I mean? And one of the few ideas when I started working in 2012, that I brought to the table was this sense of the megaliths being a kind of landed Hireath, the megalithic landscape of Wales, all these Stone Age monuments that we can't ever know what they're doing there, who put them there, and why. So what's it like? What's it like to have this question become part of your life from the moment you're born? That you see this all the time. You see these megaliths, but you don't know why they're there. They become both familiar, but also an endless mystery. And that was kind of an anchor to me in the book. And it affords that sense of landed Hireath, visual Hireath that you can't get away from, that conundrum. But also, it's a great example of creative Hireath as well. The megaliths are. When we don't know, we imagine. And hey, Amy, you want to put up the pictures of Pentra Ivan? Let's see. Aha, there you go. There's one. This is Pentra Ivan megalith. It's 5,000 years old. And that's Carningly in the background, the Hill of Angels. They say that if you sleep on Carningly, one of two things will happen. The angels will talk to you in your dreams, or the earth will tell you its secrets. And I'd really rather hear from the earth, I think. And so here's, to me, just this is a description of this place, the introduction to the chapter on megaliths. After I die, I want my ashes to be scattered in Pentra Ivan's shadow, unless it's windy. Whoever does this will have to wait for a windless day. Not that those come along too often. It's on those rare still days that the hawthorn trees, the ones that are most exposed and bent nearly lateral by the prevailing westerlies, can break your heart. They're just out of this picture, unfortunately. They're just trees bent over from the wind. Maybe they will break your heart. They look ridiculous, these trees, like blown birthday candles on the edge of being extinguished, dusted over to one side. When there's no wind, you wonder why they don't bring springs back up straight, but they don't. So this is sort of my sense of how much I've looked at this place, how much I love this place, and the idea that there are springboards to imagination too is present here at Pentre Yvon. If you stand under the one end, sort of with a heavy capstone, not the pointed end, and close your eyes and make a wish, the wish comes true, supposedly. But other megaliths get standing stones in this area, supposedly on moonlit nights, get up and go to the beach and dance together. Others were, I love that. That's my favorite. Others were thrown into place by King Arthur. It just opens this wonderful long field where you can plant your imagination, anything that you imagine. So true, Jane.
Yeah, and I mean, as I read the last few chapters of the book last night, what also struck me was you have a section where you talk about after the most recent drought that the drought began to reveal old crop lines. Is that what they are? Old crop lines in the, reveal sort of old lives underneath all the lush green that normally, when all that lush green is sort of taken away, this other old life emerges. And so I got the feeling by the end of the book that sort of the mysteries are endless, and that all of them are not on the surface. All of them, some of them have been exposed for thousands and thousands of years, but others are just sort of will expose themselves for a while and then disappear again with the next, lush summer, and that there's nowhere you can look in Wales without having these revelations of mystery. And I think you convey that really well in the book, sort of the depth of the mystery throughout and all its strata. So
that's beautifully put. I mean, that's so true. There was a mega drought recently, and what Jane is saying is that the old the crops died back, the grasses dried back, and what you could see from above on plains were the outlines suddenly of stone building underground where the grass doesn't grow as well on top. So there were brown lines, and Roman villas emerged, medieval pastures, Iron Age forts, Neolithic villages and huts. Everything is there, the strata, as you say, of all the time past, hidden normally. But what's so cool, and this just gives me goosebumps to talk about, is that there's all the unknowing on one side, and then miraculously, there's the knowing too, that there are places in Wales. Like I can read Jack and the Beanstalk, and I don't know where that's set. I have no idea. But there are similar stories in Wales that go back much further, they're much older than the Jack tales. And yet those stories mention places in the Welsh countryside that I can go. I've been and go to that place that's like right up the street from a donut shop, or some place that's very much of the present, and sit in the same spot the characters sat in this tale that from what used to be called the Dark Ages, from a time even before that, first written down in the 12th century. I can go sit where those characters sat, feel what they felt, and remember the story. That's incredible. So there's both the mystery, and yet there's the link as well to the distant past. And those stories are amazing. The one I'm thinking of is set in the town of Narberth in southwest Wales. And the story is from a book called The Mabinogion. But in this one scene, 4 characters go sit on this magic mound, which is actually a Neolithic fort, people think. But there is a mound and it's still there. And if you sit on the magic mound, you'll receive wonders or injuries. And it's hard to tell them apart. And there's a thunderclap and a mist falls. And when the mist rises, they're alone. Everything is gone. All the animals, all the buildings, all the people, it's only them left in all the world, in all of Wales. Actually, stuff goes on in England across the border in the story. But to me, this is the quintessential fountainhead of Hireath, the first encounter of it in literature to me. This is where it all comes from, that dread of things being taken away. And still gives me goosebumps today, knowing this is a language that has no verb for to own and to possess. And that links up with this too. You have to say things are only with you in Welsh, not I have something.
You know, this, just hearing you talk also just makes me wonder, and have you ever wondered, you know, and this will lead back to how you got to Wales, but I can't imagine your life without it. And I'm like, you know, it seems to have sort of shaped your life, and to the extent also that, you know, you went there, and I'm guessing going there, you did not have any idea of what it would end up meaning to you, or you just went there because they had a word and image program, correct?
I did. I went there like an idiot. I mean, I
so,
was an idiot.
yeah.
I knew nothing.
But it's also the place, not only did it sort of work on you, you also brought to it important parts of your life. Like you went there in your, you know, the beginnings of your relationship with Marguerite to sort of have the freedom to test out the relationship. So the place itself becomes that place now forever within your relationship that is the place where you first sort of settled into each other. So it works both ways. Wales met you and you met Wales. And that's kind of an interesting thing about, I think, love of place or fidelity to place that I think often has to happen.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I've never articulated it that way. That's a beautiful way to articulate it, because I think there is a give and a take for sure, and back and forth. And that actually brings up a really interesting idea about Wales, this sense of Cynefin. Cynefin is another word like Hireath that doesn't have an exact cognate in English. Cynefin is a rootedness, a heftedness to a particular place, that you belong, a place where you belong. And it can also mean a sudden sense that you belong to a place that you've never been. And that's what I experienced when I first got to Wales. Very literally, this place I had kind of in my mind's eye suddenly was before my eyes for the first time. And it was a very particular treeless landscape, hilly landscape, woven together geologically in a way that made both human decisions and the last glaciation, the way the geography was formed, all of that was crystal clear. And I'd never been in a landscape like that before. And that was critical to me at that time in my life for understanding a kind of perspective of how big or small I was on the planet and what my role was. And for the first time, I saw almost through a deep time perspective. And that made me feel at home in Wales in a way I never felt at home in my home of suburban New Jersey, where I grew up. I could never get that sense. It's all built up. You know, you don't tell somebody, I'll meet you at the bottom of the valley, say, go to such and such number at such and such street. It's an exclusively human reference. And Wales was much larger than that. So that that feeling of at home, I think, is why why Marguerite and I, in the first summer we were together as a couple, that we could go to Wales and introduce ourselves as a couple before we could do it in the States. Wasn't that we were running away, we were going to a place that I felt certainly very much at home. And that, Jane, leads me to something I want to ask you about, because that implies that home is not a particular thing, it's a path, it's a sliding scale. And you, my friend, very memorably wrote about home as a path for my publisher's literary magazine. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I did, I have been, it's interesting. I've been in Maine since 2004. So that's going on 17 years, more than 17 years at this point. And, when I think of Maine, when I look out at Maine, I love it. It's a place that people go over the moon for, but I don't go over the moon for Maine. I feel very comfortable here. I call it my home now. I never call myself a Mainer, but I think that is a cultural thing where you're not a Mainer unless you're born here. And that might be some of the distance I feel. I don't know. But I had a much sort of a greater depth of feeling when I think about it for the landscape of both the farm in the Merrimack Valley, which I grew up on and then returned to, but also for Nantucket, which I lived in right after college for about 4 years. And I'm wondering if, having come to Maine at the age of 50 and having had those other landscapes and those encounters with other landscapes sort of readied me for not having that kind of sweeping feeling for the place or something, and those were also places, Nantucket was a place where I first gave myself the space to write. Mm-hmm. And as much as I loved living on Nantucket, I understood that if I wanted to sort of follow my path as a writer, that I would have to leave Nantucket, because I didn't know enough to sort of pull that rabbit out of my hat, to use a cliche, on my own. I had to sort of go where there were other writers. I had to, find out more about that life. So I've always had that question about, why, and I know I can't go back to Nantucket. It's sort of, or to the farm, that those landscapes have sort of evolved outside of me by now, but they're in my mind in this sort of, the old places they were and what they meant to me still live in my mind, even though I'm here. So I think of, that was Lucy Larcom, the 19th century poet's idea that, place is a path, and you arrive at one place and then the next place opens up to you and the next place opens up to you. And maybe that path is going around the same orchard all your life or something.
It could be.
I don't know.
It could be. And it also weaves in and out of the imagination as you change and remember and idealize or project and wonder. Yeah. We bring that equation of place. This goes to my Smith teaching. I teach a class at Smith on place, travel, and time. And we define place in the beginning, like, what the heck is this? Does this word mean? And I tell the students it's an equation, that it equals place equals a point on the globe plus the self. And the self is a subset of imagination and memory. Mm-hmm. And so place is always a fluid thing that's happening as this equation adds up and is subtracted differently. Mm-hmm. Always.
What maybe this will be how we wrap up, but how did you feel when you finished the book? I mean, after 8 years of work on it. So.
It's a good question. Like, when did I finish? I was thinking about that the other day, like, what was the finishing point? Because then it's sort of,
there's a dribble at the end.
There's a dribble. It's like, you think, oh, I need a preface, and no, I don't need that. And then there are the edits.
Yeah, and the reading and the blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
But there was a moment at the end of 2018 where I did essentially say, walked out of my study and went to Marguerite and said, finish the book. And I thought I would just dance and jump up and down and want to run around the block naked. I kept saying that's what I was going to do. I threatened, but I did not do. And yeah, and instead, it felt like the opposite. It felt like this this thing that had been living and growing with me, like raising something, like raising a child or a puppy or something external to me, but also of me, that as I changed, it changed with me. That stopped. And this thing became something that was fixed. And I've told people, I felt like it was a butterfly that flew, and now I put it in a glass case with a pin in it. And I stopped it. Like I stopped its breath. And it was, and I think that's just an emblem for the way we all feel reluctant to step back from things. Like, are they really finished? But it was also just sheer sadness and disappointment that this process that was so hard and so painful and so fraught and so full of agents who said no and publishers who said no was also great joy. It was the thing I wanted to do most. It was the thing. Somebody asked about this the other day, like, how did you have the patience to do this? Because I don't tend to be a patient person. Marguerite will tell you, I yell at other drivers when they can't hear me. But when I turned 50, I felt like mortality blowing on the back of my neck. I felt like time is passing. And if you want to say something that matters to you, you better damn well say it soon and do everything you can to say it as well as you can. And however long that takes, let it take that long. And I've never been so patient with a project in my life. Just let it happen. And I felt like I had to, like this was my big chance. So I did.
Yeah. There you go. So yeah, I it's always and you know what? It will be interesting when you start to read from the book in public, whether you edit yourself as you're reading.
Do you do that?
I do that all the time, especially with my earlier, I have this conversation in my head about, oh no, did I really write that sentence?
I do that. And I skip whole bits and sometimes I tangle myself up.
Or, that would have been better over here. There's a constant editing as you read. So I'm sure that the book really isn't done with you yet.
That's true. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Sure, I guess.
You just finished reading it.
Yeah.
It's so all over the place. Is there anything that stuck with you more than like when you think of the book, do you go to the Megalith chapter?
The part I sort of really engaged with probably most deeply is the first section. I want to find it, of remembering and forgetting.
Yes.
First section of, because I'm a big remembering, forgetting kind of person. So I think that's this whole idea of remembrance and forgetting, really, I love that engagement all the way through. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. That's my favorite. That's one of my two favorite chapters.
Yeah. It's beautifully done. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's about forgetting the megaliths, why they're there, but also using them as places of memory. It's kind of mnemonics in the landscape.
Yeah.
And also how megaliths are kind of like our parents, that we can only know so much about them. And sometimes our parents start to forget themselves. And it's that's the saddest Hireath, I think, of all, when my mom had dementia and couldn't remember.
Yeah.
We have a very odd conversation on the phone while I'm at Pentra Yvonne.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you, Jane. I just want to say what an honor it is to be interviewed by you, who I admire so much.
Oh, come on. Here
I do. I do. And I hear your voice in my head as I'm writing and try to find that quiet, beautiful place where you write from. So
Thank you.
hey, Amy, I didn't show all the pictures. Do you why don't you just put them up and we just can look at them real fast?
Question and answer, maybe. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was Pentra Yvonne, another shot of Pentra Yvonne. And you can just keep going. This is when I talked about the clarity of the landscape and how you can understand things that you can't understand in a built-up landscape. This is a poor photo from my iPhone, but it shows a little bit of that. The knitting together of the land. And this one kind of shows that, but it's obscured by Welsh mist. And I think there are two more. Oh, yep. That's Marguerite and me as young adults. The first summer we went to Wales, and this is where we were a couple for the first time together, in a very, 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 very cold cottage, where we lived for 6 weeks, where Marguerite learned to say, "Mae hi'n oer a bore 'ma." It's cold this morning. And I think, oh, yes, my dad and me from when I was on my master's course. And that is a kind of iconic photograph with my dad and me and my car Gimli. But, and my dad features pretty highly in the chapter on megaliths. So. Shall we take some questions if there are questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe we lost Jane. I'm not quite sure. Actually, if you don't mind, I have a question, and I see some piling up in the chat as well. But I remember us talking about the many, many drafts you went through of the Longfield and the difference between writing about a place in the third person and writing about a place in the first person. And ultimately you shifted from looking at your story kind of through like a reporter reporting on something to something very personal. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Oh, that's a great question, comment, Amy. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted this book to be an investigation of Hireath, kind of, that seems a little too formal, but I wanted to report on Wales through the lens of this idea of Hireath. And I thought that would be a very useful way of looking at this country. And I'd be in the book, I'd be like a travel writer going to the place and visiting, say, a reservoir in North Wales, where the Welsh-speaking village was drowned, to make room for to turn this valley into a reservoir for water for people in English-speaking Liverpool. So I would go, and then we would tell this Hireath story. And I started sending the book out to agents, and they kept returning it, saying, something's missing. It feels like you're missing from this book. And I fought for maybe 3 or 4 years about this. I didn't want it to be a memoir and tell my story. And then there was this incident, which I won't go into because it's too long, where it's almost this quasi mythic moment where I was at my mom's nursing home, and I had a chance to feel like physics dropped away, like I could be in 2 places at once, the past and the present, or 3 places, the present, the past, and the future, seeking myself, looking for another Pam. And I realized that Hireath applied to me too. I wanted to overcome, I yearned to overcome my being corralled in the present and be in the past and the future simultaneously. I wanted to do more than be just myself. And I thought, oh my God, I'm absent from a book on absence, me and all I desire and long for. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized it's not just longing for versions of yourself, that I've experienced Hireath in personal terms, in terms of my parents and my my career and my sexuality and my home, the home I grew up in, and very specific things to me and very universal things. And I needed to use those, to use that example of Hireath alongside the examples from Wales, and braid this very personal experience into a national communal experience. And so that's what the chapters do. And finally that hit me, but it, it's like I needed to be hit on the head with a 2x4 to understand that. So books evolve, it took a long time, and it became an incredibly personal book, which makes me uncomfortable. And I'm sure it makes Marguerite very uncomfortable. But at some point, it's not about what you want to do. It's what the book demands to become a successful book. And that's what happened. The book had an opinion.
You are the conduit.
Yes, indeed.
My mouse is a little sticky, but we have a question here. I believe it's, I think it's from Natalie White. Who wants to know if there's an opposite to the word Hireath. I'm not saying it right. In Hireath. Is there an opposite idea or word for that?
Hey, Jane, you just read it. It's like a quiz. Do you want to answer it?
No, I don't want to. I can't pronounce anything. You go ahead.
Cool. Yes. Thanks for that question, because that is a super question. And the book actually does engage with that at the end. The word hwyl, H-W-Y-L, doesn't exist in English either. But English has taken that word on and calls it hoil, referring in English to like a sudden ecstatic eloquence that a preacher might have. But the Welsh meaning is more to fill entirely the present moment with soaring good spirit and inhabit the present fully. And that's exactly, to me, the opposite of Hireath, which is to have that absent present and yearning for something temporally in the past or the future, or spatially beyond where you are. So there are things that really drive Hireath away and can fill you with hwyl. Cooking from an old recipe, I think that brings back the past. Speaking a language. Welsh is one of the oldest languages in Europe. You're uttering words that have been uttered for thousands of years. Gardening, the idea of gardening from seeds that like reincarnate that garden. There are ways to overcome Hireath. I think we need both, and our lives are a weave of both. And I won't say about the end, but in the end, it ends very happily. It's not a sad book, right, Jane? It's not a bummer of a book. It's about this longing, this constant longing for what you don't have, but it's cheerful.
Yeah,
I think
it's a book to have a conversation with. I think, it's a book to have, if there's a lot of meat to it, a lot of sort of things you can walk away from and return to, and things like that. So, yeah.
And Pam Lohman, so one Pam to another, wants to know when you learned Welsh.
Now there's a once and future issue right there. Um, because I would not say that I have learned it. My first book, Travels in an Old Tongue, is all about me supposedly learning it and traveling around the world to speak it, to become fluent in it. And at the end of that 5-month trip, speaking Welsh a lot to people all over the world who didn't have the opportunity to speak it or couldn't speak English, and they and I only shared Welsh, and we could use it as an international language, which was really cool. I could speak and understand, and then I went on and wrote books in English, and I don't live in Wales, and it's kind of petrified, so it's stuck there in my head. And I live in terror that when I go to Wales on this book tour that's coming up at the end of November, somebody's going to interview me in Welsh, and I'll probably die on the spot or melt, or I don't know, overheat in some way. I just, it's locked. So it is a once and future undertaking.
Are there links between Welsh and the Irish Gaelic and other, I don't know the right term, but
the Celtic languages.
Yeah.
Yes. The Celtic is a branch of Indo-European languages, has absolutely no relationship beyond being in that branch to, or in that tree, has no relation to English at all. It's, they're two families of Celtic languages. So there's Irish Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, and Manx, the language of the Isle of Man. That's one. And then there's Welsh, Breton, and Cornish, and that's another branch. So like Breton is very close to Welsh. It sounds very similar, even though it's written differently. And of those languages, Welsh is by far the most spoken and the healthiest and the most used. Cornish is no longer spoken, and I'm not sure about Manx.
Do Manx cats come from the same
And
place?
they speak Manx, maybe. Yes, they do. They come from the Isle of Man.
Very cool.
Yeah, who knew? That's
All
probably
right.
what everybody's going to go away with tonight. It's like Manx cats.
Amy Greer has a comment that, again, I'm going to massacre it. Hule reminds her of mono no aware in Japanese culture, although maybe a little less fleeting.
Okay, Amy, you have to tell us what that means.
Hopefully she's madly typing. So while she's typing, Sarah Chase wanted to express to Jane Brox how rewarding it was to reconnect via this venue. She has the fondest memories of you two sharing various Nantucket accommodations, gathering grape leaves, and living to read Anatole Broyard's articles in the New York Times.
Those were the years. Sarah, I'm living in Brunswick, Maine. So send me an email through janebrox.com and I'll write back to you.
That's so great.
I love that.
I remember living to read Anatole Broyard's articles in the book review.
Yeah.
Oh, those were the days.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amy Greer says that the Japanese idea of mono no aware is usually a connection with something in nature, as symbolized by the cherry blossoms, which are here and then gone so quickly.
It sounds similar, doesn't it? Yeah, almost. That it's interesting that almost links the experience of Hul to the experience of Hireath, right? I love that. I think that's what we experience. Hul doesn't last, becomes a moment, becomes Hireath. That's so true. And I like that it's connected to nature. And I have to say, from Katie de Bonneville, petrified as opposed to petrified. I love that. That's funny.
Petroglyph, petrofry.
Petro fries, something I can sell.
The other wonderful thing in the book is Pam, the portrait of your father is just wonderful. You could just tell that the deep fondness and affection, and Pam's father was a rock man, so a rock and mineral man. So that comes through sort of, that's Pam's heritage, and that comes through.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. My dad gave me the great gift of my name, Stone. My dad, the mineral collector.
Yeah, yeah.
And my brother's name is Craig Petro, or Petro, as he says. So it's like stone, rock.
Maybe that's why you connected so immediately with Wales.
It could be. It could be. Hireath is, Amy says, Hireath is always sort of with us, is sort of always with us. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, it's encompassing it. We live within Hireath, I think, more than we experience it from time to time. It's a state of being. It's a state of being human, really. It's a description of not like our dog is in the moment, lives in the moment, but we're always living past the moment one way or another. So, and that engenders both nostalgia, wistfulness, hopes, yearnings, fears, nervousness.
And Natalie asks, why do you think few cultures have similar words?
I don't know. There are a lot of cultures that have words that come close, a feeling of having lost the self, the sense of the true self, or very, very similar things. And I think those are just as perfectly adequate and reasonable for that particular national experience, or the linguistic experience. Wales, I think, now it's just like theorizing, centers on home, the loss of home, because of the national experience of lessening. It's always been a lessening of, people spoke Welsh, or the precursor to Welsh, Brittonic, all over the Isle of Britain. And slowly that was chipped away until the Anglo-Saxons controlled what's become more or less England, the biggest part of the island. And the Welsh have less and have become a vassal of the incomers. And the word Wales means home of the other, home of the people who aren't us. And that's the way the world knows these people. So it's a kind of kick in the teeth of this perpetual sense. Every time we say Wales, it's a perpetual sense of the loss of home, the loss of agency, of national agency. So maybe that's why it's so specifically, this yearning sense is related to home in Wales.
And it's not a big country. How many square miles is it?
Oh, Lord, I don't know that.
It seems like it's just kind of hanging on to the edge.
Like a big barnacle.
Yeah.
Somebody said if you iron out all the hills, it's bigger than Texas. I can say it's there's 3 million people in Wales, and something like 5 million sheep, or something like that.
I love that. More sheep than people.
More sheep than people.
So Sally Pearson says, so many countries and cultures have a deep meaning of spirit and depth of history. Do you think that the United States has anything like that?
Well, since that is an open question, Jane Brox, what do you think about that?
I think, the country is based on conquering. What are you going to say? And it's, I feel like the thing that sort of distinguishes the United States is the desire to overrun the past in a way, so I think the continent itself is very old. The idea of the United States, the idea of America is very young. And
Right.
so, but that idea of America has, worked very hard to obliterate what was here before. So it's hard to haul up the past now. As you show in talking about your hometown in New Jersey, how
Oh, right.
Native Americans there, there's no trace of them left because, everything. So, to find traces is an enormous amount of work, and there are very few, so
Right.
it's,
Yeah, there's always a tension. It's more of a
Yeah.
tension than a continuity, say.
That's what I would say. I mean, it's, there are traditions, but, I mean, when European friends come to visit, they kind of laugh at what we call as old. I say, I live in an old house that's 150 years old. And they say, what are you talking about?
We call that the new house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an idea. It's an intellectual idea. The idea of the United States of America, rather than an organic sentiment, lived sentiment. So I think it's very, very different from most other experiences of home.